Hello everybody and welcome back to Vehicles of War Thunder. In this episode we are going to start touching on some of the French ground vehicles that are available in War Thunder. As I usually try to do, we are going to be starting with the reserve vehicles, specifically with the Hotchkiss H39 and the H35 and H39. In War Thunder there are three versions of these Hotchkiss H3Xs, is probably the best way to refer to them collectively. There is the H35, which was one of the original reserve tanks for France before being removed after a change was made to how ammunition worked in the game, which resulted in the one round that the tank has available to it effectively being too impotent to actually do anything at all. It was effectively replaced by the H39, which is a better tank, and finally there is a premium version of the H39. With no difference beyond a special little skin to go with it. Before we start, all the footage used in this video is with the H39 because the H35 is complete and utter garbage. And we'll get into that a little bit more once we get to the how does the vehicle perform section of the video. With that out of the way, let's start talking about the history of these two vehicles. Renault and Schneider had been longtime providers in the French tank industry. Founded in 1875 near Saint Denis, founded by the American engineer Benjamin B. Hotchkiss, Hotchkiss was a newcomer in the field of tanks, but was already well known by the military for its machine guns, cars, and transmissions. The Hotchkiss H35 was at first a private design to answer a 1926 specification that called for a light, cheap infantry tank. By June 1933, Hotchkiss had a design proposal ready that showed off some innovations, such as an entirely cast steel hull sections. In theory, it was also cheaper and lighter than the Renault D2. On August 2, 1933, a final specification was issued that called for a 6-ton tank that was uniformly protected by 30mm of armor. Both Hotchkiss and Renault competed for the contract, with Renault being the first to deliver a prototype that was accepted as the R35. On the other hand, Hotchkiss's first prototype they showed off was a machine gun-armed tankette that was tested until March 1935 and was followed by an identical vehicle in May, just armed with an actual cannon. Both designs were rejected, however, due to the requirement for the contract changing in the meantime, now to be for a tank with 40mm of armor. In August 1935, Hotchkiss delivered their third and final prototype with a new cast hull and APXR cast turret armed with a 37mm short-barreled gun. This design was accepted in November as the Hotchkiss H35, and 200 units were ordered. Production began mid-1936, and by September the first vehicles were delivered and heavily tested. During this testing, though, it was discovered that the vehicle's cross-country abilities were overestimated, resulting in a vehicle with bad balance and would give the crew a bumpy ride, which could be an issue and pose a danger when moving information, especially when firing. The power-to-weight ratio was also considered insufficient. As a result, the army refused to accept the vehicles, but couldn't cancel their order for fear of political upheaval. The cavalry, on the other hand, accepted the vehicles because slow deliveries for the Soma S35 resulted in them having gaps they needed to fill in their inventory. The design of the H35 was a small and narrow machine in a bid to keep the weight down. It also had some of the thickest armor of any light tank of 1935. It also shared some similarities with the Renault R35, such as the APXR cast turret with sloped sides, rounded bottom, and spherical cupola. The H35 was armed with a low-velocity 37mm gun, the SA-18M37. It had a coaxial machine gun in the form of the Rebelle 7.5mm M31. All of this was protected by a small additional mantelet. The main gun could carry 102 rounds, and the machine gun could carry 2,400 rounds in total in the vehicle. The gun also had a elevation and depression of +20 degrees to -30 degrees. The tank was crewed by only 2 people, a driver and a gunner. In War Thunder, this of course means that in realistic battles, if you lose either of your crew, you're knocked out. The H35 weighs in at around 11.5 tons and is powered by a single Hotchkiss 6-cylinder gasoline engine that developed 75 horsepower, resulting in a powered weight ratio of around 6.5 horsepower per ton. According to a military intelligence identification of foreign armored vehicles, German, Japanese, Russian, Italian, and French from the US War Department, that was released on June 20th, 1941, and is available on the Internet Archive. The H-35 has a road speed of 17 miles per hour and a max range of 82 miles. The H-35 had a synchro-mesh gearbox with 5 forward and 1 reverse. The H-35 and H-39 could climb slopes up to 40 degrees and can negotiate vertical obstacles up to 2 feet and 7 inches in height. It's also capable of crossing trenches that are 4 feet 11 inches wide. In late 1937, production, however, was interrupted on the H-35 after a total of 400 units were produced. The H-35 was mostly delivered to the cavalry, but some units were later delivered to the infantry because deliveries of the R-35 were insufficient. An improved version of the H-35 was proposed by Hotchkiss and would be designated as the H-39. It was largely the same as the H-35, with the only real difference being a new engine that could develop 120 horsepower, and equipping it now with the new SA-38 long-barreled 37mm gun. This new engine, gun, as well as a new 207-liter fuel tank increased the weight of the H-39 to 12 tons. The new powered-weight ratio of the H-39 was around 10 horsepower per ton, and a new road speed of 26 miles per hour with a range of 130 miles. The SA-38 gun, because it was longer, also used longer rounds, which decreased the number of rounds the tank could carry to 90 rounds compared to the 102 with the SA-18. However, supply for this new gun was also low. As a result, some H-39s would be pushed into service with the old SA-18. Starting in October 1938, production on this new vehicle would begin with a total of 700 produced, the last of which would be thrown into combat right at the factory door without exhaust or mudguards. In service, the H-35 would see its first action in May-June 1940, but would perform poorly due to their limited speed, endurance, and the low-velocity main gun. German infantry equipped with the PaK-36 37mm gun, however, were baffled to see their rounds bounce off the thick armor of what was effectively a light tank. The H-39 would also see action during the May-June 1940 campaign, but due to mismatched formations, slow H-35s would operate alongside the faster Soma S-39 and H-39. With the B-1 BIS, the H-35s and H-39s would find themselves in spread-out formations that rarely had clear superiority over German forces. On the H-39, the long-barreled SA-38 and the thick armor would provide an advantage in tank-on-tank engagements against German light tanks, with the only real match being the Czech Panzer Kampfwagen 38T. However, both the H-35 and H-39 lacked radio communication between units in HQ, as well as an overburdened tank commander would lead to disastrous results. Due to a lack of fuel, some units would also abandon their tanks, resulting in the tanks of entire units being captured by Axis forces for later use. Beyond use by Axis forces, the H-39 and H-35 would also see some use by the Polish, with 3 H-35s and 3 R-35s sent in July 1939 for trials that, come September, would be integrated into an ad hoc unit that fought with the Dupno, probably mispronounced that, task force. 2 would also be sold to Turkey by February 1940. After France's capitulation, the Germans found themselves with an impressive number of Renault R-35s and 40s and Hotchkiss H-35s and H-39s, in generally good condition. Around 550 H-35s and H-39s would be taken by the Waffenmacht, probably mispronounced that. Also not sure if I've just screwed up my sources and put something that's not quite correct there. Maybe it's supposed to be Wehrmacht. I don't know how I screwed that up if it was supposed to be that. Sorry about that. And modified with their original cupola being replaced by a 2-hatch model. And these would operate with independent companies as the Panzer Kampfwagen 35 H734F and the Panzer Kampfwagen 38H 735F. Why they went with 38H, I'm going to assume is because some sources also refer to the H39 as the H38. Because technically production on it began in 1938. Things get a little screwy sometimes with some of these naming conventions. Many of these captured tanks, however, would be left unchanged beyond repainting them in the Dunkelgrau livery for police and occupation duties in France. Some would see service in Finland as preparation for Operation Barbarossa. Germany would also send some to their allies to use, such as 3 units being sent to Yugoslavia, 19 to Bulgaria, 15 to Hungary, and a handful to Croatia. Under the Germans, some would see use in Normandy in June 1944 against US and other Allied tanks. By December, only 60 H-39s were still in active service. The H-39s and H-35s would be used as the basis for several conversions, such as the, and I'm going to butcher a bunch of these conversion names, apologies in advance, artillery schlepper, the 38HF, that served as an ammunition carrier to supply tanks and artillery tractors. There was also the Panzerkampfwagen, as mentioned previously. Well, actually, never mind. There was also the Panzerkampfwagen 35HF MIT 28 32 centimeter Wolfram. Again, I'm going to butcher a bunch of these names. Apologies in advance. That was an ad hoc conversion for use as a mobile rocket launcher platform that featured 2 large frameworks with 2 heavy rockets each. Another conversion was the 7.5 centimeter Pak 40 SF Auf Geschutzwagen 39HF, of which 24 units were converted in 1942 as the Marder 1 tank destroyer. A similar conversion was the 10.5 centimeter Lefh 18 SF Auf Geschutzwagen 39HF, of which 48 units were converted to, and served as a self-propelled artillery piece. Finally, there was the Panzerbeobachtungswagen 38HF that was a special conversion in 1943 to serve as an artillery observation vehicle. The last time the Hotchkiss H35 or H39 were seen on a battlefield occurred when 10 H39s were sold to Israel clandestinely and shipped from Marseille to Haifa in 1948, which took place in the 1948 War of Independence, with much more modern guns. Some sources also claim the tanks were used during the Sinai campaign in 1956. Probably not true, but again, some sources claim. Some units still exist to this day in museums, such as, according to my sources, which these may be out of date, they might have moved, they might no longer be, you know, in existence, you know, they might not function enough to have on display. But there is one located at the Yad Sherion Museum. Probably mispronounced that. 2 in Norway, 1 in Serbia, another in Bulgaria, 3 in France, most notably at the Mourmelin-Legrance, with 1 in full running condition at Saumur, 1 in Britain at the Kevin Whitcroft Collection, and finally 1 in Russia at the Kubinka Museum. That was captured from the 211th Panzer Abteilung. God, these German names, they screw with me a lot of the times. In the summer of 1944. Now for how these 2 tanks handle in-game. Well, as mentioned previously, the H-35 is garbage, so we're not going to spend much time on that. The round is terrible to the point that it effectively, as far as I can tell, cannot penetrate the vast majority of the vehicles that it will face, and potentially it's every vehicle that it will face frontally. So the only way for you to kill stuff with it is if you get a flanking shot. And for those that don't know, the H-35 is limited to firing APCR, which is not a very good round in War Thunder, because it is, if memory serves me correctly, largely in War Thunder, at least the way it's coded, intended for penetrating angled armor. So it kind of suffers when trying to pen flat armor. It also doesn't have much in the way of post-pen damage, so even if you do manage to penetrate an enemy, you need to make sure you knock out their turret crew. Specifically the gunner. Because if you don't, you will die. So, you know, you have to go for gunner first for anything you want to try to kill with the H35. Like I said, it is crap. And the fact of the matter is, the H35 is a slow vehicle, even by reserve tank standards, both in terms of its top speed and acceleration. So you're going to have a harder time getting around to the sides or rear of an enemy. It's not impossible. I mean, if you know maps well enough, and because it's a reserve tank, there's a decent chance a lot of the people you fight are going to be relatively new to the game, assuming that you're somebody who's experienced in the game. You may be able to get to a position and just kind of sit there, let the enemies drive right on past you. They may not notice, especially if you're somebody who puts a bunch of bushes on your tanks. And then you can just shoot them in the sides or the rear. I would generally probably prioritize the rear if possible, but either way. Sorry about that. On the other hand, the H39 is a much, much better tank. Its round still isn't the greatest. Sometimes it will struggle to penetrate enemies that are angled, either by accident or on purpose, because this is low tier. A lot of people don't necessarily know how to play their vehicles well. So you will have a lot of people who should be angling who don't. And as a result, you manage to, you know, they manage to ricochet your round just because they're accidentally slightly angled and your round isn't able to pen. But as mentioned, it is also not the most lethal round. You know, like I said, it will struggle to pen. All around, it is not the greatest round. It struggles to pen. But it also doesn't have a lot of post-pen damage, because it is also armor-piercing, well, actually, rather, it is armor-piercing capped, which is better than APCR, but still, it lacks explosive filler. So it's better than the APCR you have with the H35. It's still not the greatest round, though, at the end of the day. APC does not cause ammo racks nearly as much as many other forms of ammo do. Particularly ammos that have explosive fillers. You don't technically need explosive filler to cause an ammo rack. It just helps. So as a result of this, you're needing to rely on the round itself and the spalling. Well, you know, the shrapneling, whatever. Killing the crew when you shoot at an enemy tank. And the reality is you can't really rely on the round itself, since in War Thunder, rounds will literally just disappear sometimes when they hit certain parts of tanks or crew members. I've literally shot at enemy tanks in this game, and I've like hit the gunner or the driver or whatever the case may be, and they just absorb the entire round, even after they're dead. Or, well, excuse me, in War Thunder, knocked out. And just nothing. I do nothing. Even when they're knocked out, they just somehow magically absorb rounds. I've had it happen numerous times, and it is one of the more annoying things about this game. There's a lot of annoying things about this game, but that is one of the things that is really freaking annoying. Is just having your rounds randomly disappear after penetrating the enemy. And sometimes that just results in you dying, because a round that should have done damage seemingly does nothing, because, oh, you hit the driver who was already dead, and he's just a giant black hole that absorbs your rounds if you shoot into him when he's knocked out. But yes, so like I said, the round is not the greatest. It's also such a small caliber at 37 millimeters, even at these early tiers. 37 millimeters is kind of a small caliber of round. As a result, it does not produce a whole lot of spalling, shrapneling, whatever you want to call it. The round just doesn't do a whole lot of damage after penning. So it's better than what you got with the H35, because at least you can actually pen enemies from the front. You're just not going to do a whole hell of a lot of damage in a lot of cases. So that is all I have to say about the H35 and the H39. The H35 is garbage, and the H39, while better, still has issues. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this series or any other series on the channel, the best ways to support the channel are either via Patreon if you want to get early access to videos, or the Streamlabs donation link if you want to just maximize however much money actually reaches the channel, because Patreon takes a 5% cut, and I'm pretty sure the way I have Streamlabs set up, nobody takes a cut, so the channel gets 100% of whatever you give. But as a result of going that route, you do not get any goodies. You know, you don't get your name and credits, you don't get early access to videos or anything like that if you go the Streamlabs route. You just get the good feeling that you're helping the channel a lot more individually than a single individual helps a channel via Patreon. That's the reality of the situation. If you choose to support the channel, that allows me to have money to be able to go and afford more easily buying premium and especially event vehicles that I want to cover, especially if they don't have a tech tree version that I can at least use as some sort of frame of reference. But that's not always the case. Some things literally don't have a tech tree version or of a similar type vehicle, even if it's like an earlier or later version of the vehicle. This is obviously particularly the case with like the Israeli vehicles, the Merkavas in the US tech tree. Of course, I say that, but we know Israel has their own tech tree. Currently, it's only air as of recording this video, but at some point in the nearish future, it will include ground, in which case Merkavas will now be available in a tech tree. But that's besides the point. As of right this second, if I wanted to cover the Merkavas, I would literally have to shell out to buy an event vehicle. And those, I don't know what the price they're going for right now, but event vehicles are stupid expensive a lot of the times. You know, there's event vehicles that are just absolute garbage or just aren't that good compared to other stuff you could be using. And some of them aren't even necessarily like fun meme vehicles or anything like that. Some of them are just straight up garbage, but to buy them is fairly pricey. So yeah, if you support the channel, that helps me to have the money to more easily afford to buy those event and premium vehicles when I want to go ahead and get around to covering one of them. Also, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with the channel, any potential changes to my schedule and whatnot, particularly when it comes to recording and live streaming, obviously that doesn't necessarily affect this series in particular, but if you watch other stuff on the channel, it could potentially affect you. There is a link to my Discord down below in the description. I do highly recommend that you join it. That way you know what's going on with the channel, because that is my go-to place for posting about the channel. Sometimes I'll remember to post elsewhere. I usually don't, but sometimes I do. So, with that all done, I will see you all next time. We will be covering either a Russian or a Swedish vehicle. I haven't yet decided, and that is assuming I don't have some other vehicle that ends up catching my attention. But as of right now, I'm thinking of either a Russian or Swedish vehicle. But yeah, so I'll see y'all next time. Until then, goodbye and farewell.